The House has passed a $1.6 billion to deliver anti-China propaganda overseas.
Child poverty. What?
Yeah. This is as child poverty triples. I feel like we should just, with everything that our ridiculous government passes, just go, and child poverty tripled, and child poverty tripled. Just remember child poverty tripled. Just remember there's 17 million empty homes and 1 million homeless people. Since 2016, foreign interference in American elections and civil society has become a central American political discourse issue. Yeah, mainly.
Unless it's Israel.
Well, yeah, most of it untrue, but still, yeah, it's like Russia put up a picture of Bernie Sanders in a banana hammock, and all of us had to vote for Trump after that. But apparently Washington takes a different view when it comes to American propaganda. On Monday, the House passed H.R. 1157, the Countering the PRC Malign Influence Fund.
Hilarious. Don't they already have the Shen Yun, the theater performance?
Oh, that's not U.S. government, though.
They help fund it, don't they?
It's you guys have seen it, all those ads for that says, it shows a ballerina, it says...
China before communism.
It says art before communism or whatever it was. But anyway, this legislation authorizes more than $1.6 billion for the State Department and USAID. Oh, our old favorite CIA cutout. Over the next 5 years to, among other purposes, subsidize media and civil society sources around the world that counter Chinese malign influence globally, like that balloon they put over us. That's a massive spend of money, about twice, for example, the annual operating expenditure of CNN. So now you've got double a CNN that's just the whole purpose is anti-China propaganda globally. This bill goes beyond that by subsidizing independent media and civil society and other information operations in foreign countries. Indeed, this is already routine, but now they're pumping billions of dollars into it. Crucially, H.R. 1157 doesn't seem to contain any requirement that U.S. government financing to foreign media be made transparent to the citizens of other countries. Big surprise. And also very important, as you mentioned, that the U.S. seems to have no problem with foreign interference in the United States by our so-called allies, by Israel, which AIPAC bragged about spending $100 million to manipulate our elections this cycle. You also have Cambridge Analytica, a British company that back when they existed, bragged about something like 90% of every election they tried to manipulate, they succeeded at. That was a British company with Steve Bannon as a former board member or something.
I also want to contextualize this historically. I was looking for the name of this because I couldn't remember it. The Congress for Cultural Freedom, the CIA-funded project, which funded newspapers, publishing companies, and traveling art exhibitions for decades after World War II in an attempt to undermine communism by promoting America as a place for freedom and tolerance towards new ideas and artistic expression. This was a remarkably insidious program because they got artists who were not anti-communist. There was even a magazine that featured Gabriel Garcia Marquez, some of his work. And of course, he was an anti-communist. So there's this very, very insidious way of uplifting artists as a way to counter the communist narrative or uplift the US as this wonderful beacon of democracy. And so what they do is they'd have these magazines where they'd have one of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's pieces and then an op-ed about how America's the best and Russia can go F itself. And it's it is very, very smart. So this $1.6 billion is part of a long legacy that the US has had for a long time of propagandizing in other places and other parts of the world for the sake of uplifting US hegemony and going against anything that is perceived by US empire as anti-American. And so what I do find funny in a kind of morbid way about this is that it doesn't work the way that the US wants it to. People in Africa, for instance, the people that I've spoken to are very clear about Russia having done way more for them than the US. They want to kick the US out. They want to kick France out. They are willing to work with China on the pursuit of rare earth minerals in a way that is beneficial for the African people and for China, whereas the US just wants to colonize and take advantage of it. And so there is a very clear understanding on the ground in the global South, basically, in Africa and South America, Central America, Asia, the South Pacific. There's a clear understanding on the ground of who the baddies are. And I'm not saying that everybody loves Russia and China. There are complex relationships regardless, but it is very clear that the US is absolutely the biggest baddie, and that the US are the ones who are really interested in a global empire and being kings of the graveyard, whereas Russia and China continuously like show that they're not interested in this kind of conquest. They're interested in a sort of capitalistic expansion, sure, just because, global capitalist markets, but they are not interested in the kind of violent hegemony and takeover that the US is.
Great segue. I have proof for you.
Thank you.
BRICS members were just urged to, and this is largely behind closed doors, so this is not really designed to just, lie to the world, but BRICS members were just urged to promote peace, which is the opposite of what the US is doing. The US is constantly going in front of the UN and others and saying why someone needs to be attacked or someone needs to have an economic war against them. At a high-level BRICS gathering on security affairs, Beijing, meaning, the Chinese government, has issued a 4-point proposal urging fellow members to practice peaceful coexistence, build on multilateralism, push for political settlement of crises, and defend justice. These are all the opposite of what the U.S. actually stands for. Wang Yi, a member of the political bureau of the CCP in China, was joined at the meeting by representatives of countries ranging from Russia, Brazil, India, South Africa, Egypt, the UAE, Iran, Ethiopia. Countries should break away from the exceptionalism, which of course is what the U.S. uses to justify just about all of its wars of aggression. Exceptionalism and double standards. The U.S. double standards are really on display with their whole let's get back to a rules-based world, which basically means the U.S. sets the rules, gets to break all the rules, and other countries need to follow the rules. Double standards and resolutely reject any words or actions that jeopardize the authority of the UN or deny the binding force of the UN Security Council resolutions.
Which is owned by the US.
Well, largely, but the US can't, because of the way the vetoes work, the US can't do anything through the UN that China or Russia or others won't want to veto.
Sure,
so there is a stopgap.
But I meant if it weren't for the US, then, well, obviously things would look different in Palestine. But if it weren't for the US, even in as with regards to the UN, things would look a lot different. I think that this, like you said, this was done, behind closed doors. So it's not just a media ploy, but it's also China has brokered several or tried to broker several peace deals. So it's they're not just doing this for the clicks, y'all. They're doing this because they actually want this. They got all
the Palestinian groups to agree to basically work with each other, which had never happened before. That was just recently.
I mean, you could and you could argue about oh, they're just doing this for their own sake. It's I don't really give a shit. I don't really care if they're doing this because they know it's good for their economy or because they really are good human beings. Peace is just better. And I think that it's an important conversation to have with regards to nuance, because I think people who are raised in this very fakaked system of the United States, we're stuck in a binary in a lot of ways, but especially when it comes to politics, you're either for the Republicans or you're for the Democrats. You're either for Russia or you're against them. It's no, I'm not. Personally, I hate all nation states, but that's beside the point. The point is that I can look at what Russia and China are doing in certain respects and be yes, thank you, please, more of this. And then I can also look at them in other respects and be don't love that. I think it's important to be able to hold multiple ideas at once and to recognize that when it comes to the US, there's basically no, hey, love that, more of that, please. And recognize that when it comes to other countries, they are actually trying to do more good. And this is, the rise of the multipolar world could not come quickly enough, because the sooner the US empire falls, the better off the rest of the world will be. As Americans, I think, or as USians, we just have to figure out how we are going to make it over this critical point of the ultimate failure of US empire. How are we going to survive and care for each other?
I think it was beautifully said. I also want to, since we're on the topic of China and the way they relate to other nations, this will just take a second, but even CNN, and this is amazing for CNN to admit this, has admitted that the whole idea of China is debt trapping all of the African nations has been debunked, because that's been a propaganda talking point that you've seen put out again and again. Oh, China's tricking all of these African nations into a debt trap. But here is an analysis on CNN that is largely basically anti-China. I mean, it's not like
They call him a dictator?
It's not vociferously anti-China, but it's kind of anti-China.
Oh, they said the Chinese leader. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's a little lighter on the anti-China, but it's not like supportive. Anyway, they're talking about how he made a bunch of promises to the African nation to be fulfilled in the next 3 years, $50 billion in financial support, the creation of 1 million jobs, tens of millions of food and military aid, deepened cooperation with Africa. But here's the key point. Analysts have largely debunked earlier debt trap claims that Beijing was purposefully seeking to indebt countries in order to gain leverage over their assets as it lent toward the construction of highways, rail lines, and power plants across Africa under Xi's flagship Belt and Road Initiative. So you guys may have heard that propaganda talking point, oh, China's just putting the debt trap on all of Africa and buying it up. And yet most African leaders have denied that. And guess what? They're allowed to think for themselves. They actually have brains. So it's pretty racist to just be like, oh, China's too smart and they can't figure it out. On top of that, here you have CNN even admitting that the whole debt trap idea has been debunked.
Well, and proof is in the pudding, as they say. Like the way that I understand, having heard from folks who are in Africa and analysts who have spent a lot of time there, basically is that like when the Chinese work with, whether that be people in the DRC or in South Africa or wherever, there is this interest in like, okay, we're going to build roads and we're going to build schools or like a hospital or something like that. Whereas the U.S. is like, just give us all of your shit or we'll kill you. That's how the U.S. we'll put a military base here, so you're welcome. And so, of course, if you were an African leader, why would you not want to go that route? And then again, like as I mentioned, historically, the way that Russia has showed up for and with African nations who are trying to buck colonialism, it's like people aren't idiots. And there is like this very racist idea that like people in Africa can't think for themselves, people in South America. And yet the ironic thing is, of course, as I said, a lot of these people have a way better understanding of imperialism and colonialism than 90% of American citizens.
And just one more thing from this CNN admission that the debt trap is propaganda. African leaders have also pushed back on the premise while in Beijing, with South Africa's Ramaphosa rejecting the notion that when China invests, it is with an intention of, in the end, ensuring that those countries end up in a debt trap or debt crisis. China is also not seen by observers to be the main cause of African debt distress in most cases, with debt to its lenders making up a comparatively small portion of the continent's overall public debt. So the debt to China is a tiny portion of African debt. And yet our propaganda is, oh my God, they've destroyed Africa.
Which is hilarious coming from the U.S.
Yes. Meanwhile, we're like, are there any slave ships still coming? Turn them around.
Yeah, exactly.
Turn them around.
Go around the back.
Go back to California. Go to California.